Chapter 58. When Jason walked through the door to his office and said those first words, there was a veritable implosion surrounding him. He was instantly fenced in by laughing, giggling, and joyous elation on the part of all there, plied with an instant barrage of questions about where he'd been and how he made it home. Their questions went unanswered. Only after being consistently ignored did they realize this revelry lacked the participation of both Jason and Mickey, the latter of whom stayed rooted to her place on the couch. Everyone in the room had been so amazed to be laying eyes on Jason, they didn't really notice something profound was happening right before their eyes. One by one, each in the room looked back and forth at the two of them, and only then did they see Jason and Mickey's eyes locked onto each other. Like the biblical parting of the Red Sea, the group opened up an unobstructed path between the two lovers. Sliding his son off his hip, while still not taking his eyes off Mickey, Jason slowly walked forward to her. Mickey was in shock, or at least she looked that way. Her eyes couldn't get any bigger, and she was acutely aware she was running on the ragged edge of passing out. This was like all those dreams of Jason, and a part of her was unable to decide if this was real, or if this was another slumbering facade of reality. This dream was so real, much more so than any of the others. Jason strode to his one true love, knelt down at her feet, and reached out his hand. Mickey's eyes snapped to his hand, reaching toward her, and, with trembling fingers, she lifted her hand toward his. The lace on her arm fell to the side, which made her reach falter. She was waiting for the dream to end as it had every time before. But it didn't. Seeing her losing her strength, Jason reached further and took hold of Mickey's hand. First, touch. It was as if the dams of emotion and the very floodgates of happiness broke open. The touch was the key to a lock Mickey thought would never be opened again. She had resigned herself to being alone for the rest of her life, even though Jason had said not to in his letter. She knew there was no other man for her, and now that man had been resurrected. He was touching her fingers, and the touch was electrifying. With that touch, Mickey crumbled into his arms and wept louder than she ever had in her life. Through the tears, she once again breathed in the heady aroma, which was unique and all his own. Reaching around his body, with a grip ensuring he would never leave her side again, her spirit flooded forth with all that had been ignored. As she lay her head on his shoulder, baptizing his body with the wetness of her howling cries, his hand slid up her back and held tight the nape of her neck, while he crushed his own eyes closed. Both her body and his convulsed, and a deluge of ache began rinsing away from their spirits, showering itself onto each in the form of unabated liberation. The crushing weight of solitude was now over, and the gospel of Marsalis could once again be preached by any who had the privilege to be its witness. As the two whispered invocations of love to each other, the rest of the group stood in awe at the tender emotions they were privileged to behold. Jason and Mickey, man and woman, one. Each privileged witness knew they were spectators to a devotion more profound, more intense, more overwhelming than any they had ever seen before. None who watched this pure expression of love and passion were spared from the welling up of tears. Lynn reached out to a weeping Dennis and hung onto his frame for support, whereas Terry and Diana grasped each other for reinforcement as they collapsed onto the couch behind them. For unmeasured time, all in the room sat quietly at this shrine of pure love. None wanted to add their brush strokes to this perfect painting of affection and ardor. Finally, Jason spoke. "I'm so sorry you were put through this, my love." His voice showed more tender affection than one could imagine. Still unable to form words, Mickey continued to weep. Not just his words, but the simple sound of his voice was something she craved. "I can't even fathom the depths you were driven to when I didn't come home," said Jason. By this time, Lynn had left and come back with a towel from the kitchen. Reluctantly, Mickey released her hold on Jason and gratefully accepted the offering. "I must look like a mess," said Mickey, wiping the tears and remnants of long-lost makeup from her red and swollen eyes. With an ethereal look, never taking his eyes off Mickey, Jason said, "You are the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my lifetime. Trust me when I say I've lived long enough to know." Mickey's hands, which had been busy wiping her face, dropped away, and she shot straight into the arms of her husband. Her real and alive husband! Once again, all in the room were equally affected. It was fortunate Lynn had brought towels and napkins for all. As Jason was holding his wife in his arms, he felt something on his back. Turning, he saw his son standing next to him. Scooping him up, the three embraced. With his eyes closed, Jace said, "I've missed you, Daddy." "I've missed you too, little man," said Jason. With closed eyes, the boy held his father and mother harder. They were luxuriating in the knowledge that once again they were whole. They were complete. Eventually, the coarse intrusion of spoken word burbled forth from the room. Dennis simply said one powerful word. "How?" Reluctantly pulling himself away from his family, Jason took a corner of the towel in his wife's hands and turned to the group while wiping his eyes. Looking at them, he saw 4 people holding on to each other for dear life. Knowing that they were deeply affected by the reunion, Jason began to speak. "What is the last thing you saw when I left?" asked Jason. "We saw you talking with the people in the park," said Dennis. "Terry interpreted for us what you and the others were saying, and then you all left our viewpoint. I was going to reset the portal to watch where you were going, but that's when it happened." "When what happened?" asked Jason. "Oh my God, you don't know, do you?" blurted Diana. "Of course you don't. You couldn't." Jason stared blankly at the group until Dennis began to speak. "It was Kenji, pal. That poor excuse for a road apple shut off the portal and marooned you back there." "Yeah," added Mickey without looking up. "Then he sent 2 officers to tell me you had died in an explosion, and you did it saving some other people." "That son of a—" Then shaking his head, Dennis added, "I knew he was low. But that's just—" "Sociopathic," said Diana. "Exactly," confirmed Dennis. Furrowing his brow, he asked, "Wait a minute. How did you get back?" "Kenji," said Jason as he sat back on the couch, looking up at the ceiling and shaking his head. With noticeable contempt in his voice, he said, "I knew he couldn't be trusted." That's for sure, agreed Dennis. But how did you get back here, Bud? I mean, you and I both figured out that once the bridge was severed, there was no way to perfectly reestablish it. How did you do it? That's a long story, my friend, said Jason, rolling his eyes. When he could see that everyone was more than eager to hear the story in every detail, Jason saw it was important to relate all that happened. He took a cleansing breath and, as he sat next to Mickey, began to speak. When you saw us leave the park, we went to the building where the council chambers of the Grand Council of New Galimar are located. Jason sat there reflecting on the memories, and a small smile played itself across his lips. I have to tell you, these people won me over in about 5 seconds flat. I have never identified with anybody like I have with them. I felt completely at home and completely at peace every moment I was with them. As I was waiting to speak with the council, I sat there watching the families enjoying time with each other and with other families. It was amazing. In due course, it was time to speak in front of the council, so Lord Insolvent called me in. Lord? Asked Diana. It's a term of respect they use in referring to each other, but it's usually reserved for those who are more mature and well-respected, explained Terry. Nodding, Jason added, I was waiting in the wings before I went up to the podium, and that's when he told the council a person was there to talk to them and that he was human. I could actually hear a gasp from the audience, and there was a lot of murmuring among them, laughed Jason. But by the time I approached the podium, the room was quiet as a morgue. I'm pretty sure nobody there was expecting me to let out much more than sniffs and grunts. Why? Asked Mickey. It was obvious she was still a little shaken up from having Jason next to her. She maintained a death grip on his hand, and her eyes never left him. When they first came here thousands of years ago, they encountered a very barbaric set of humans. They felt it would be a very long time before humans would ever become anything else. So my coming to them and being able to understand and comprehend their language was astounding to them. Nodding, Dennis added, I gotta say, pal, you sounded like you had a pretty good handle on the language from what we heard in the park. You and languages are pretty amazing. Jason glanced over at Terry, who had a look of concern. Jason knew Terry didn't want to share how the amulet helped him, so he simply said, I had a good teacher. Terry smiled in relief. The others interpreted simply as the giving and receiving of a compliment. Anyway, I explained why I was there and how I got there. They were understandably impressed to learn I was not only human, but also a time traveler in a time machine Dennis and I had built. I think the biggest thing that won them over was I knew so much about them and their city, including the existence of the TSM. What's a TSM? Asked Mickey. It stands for the Tectonic Stabilization Machine. It's the device I fixed to stabilize the Earth's core and avert the eruption at Yellowstone, replied Jason. You fixed? What do you mean, you fixed? Exclaimed Dennis. That thing needed Galimarian DNA, and only Galimarian DNA. Correct. That's what we were told by the TSM caretaker, Kalius. But when I discovered the portal window was gone for some unknown reason and I was marooned, they actually proposed a solution I hadn't thought of before. Part of it involved the council authorizing an engineer to train me on what I needed to do to fix the machine. And they made an exception in the security systems and allowed my DNA to have access to the systems. But how did you get back from the 1400s to now without a time machine? That's the other part of their solution. My dear, you are looking at the only living 700-year-old man, replied Jason. What? Was the unified response from everybody in the room. Here's the deal, said Jason. When I told the council why I was there and what was going to happen when Jose landed on the island, I suggested they use their suspended animation technology to put themselves in stasis for the duration until it was safe for them to be awake again. We had a little bit of back and forth discussion on the whole grandfather paradox thing, but in the end, they saw that any interference whatsoever in the events of the Earth between then and now would have dire consequences. They needed to act like they were dead all these years, so they told me about an undersea sanctuary where they could relocate their entire population and where they could sleep in suspended animation until I woke them up. Okay, let me get this straight. They didn't fix the TSM, you did. Why didn't they just fix it when they were awakened? Asked Diana. Well, you see, that is part of the solution that they came up with that I hadn't thought of, said Jason. And to be honest, I wouldn't have believed that they would have been comfortable with this idea in the first place, had it not been them that suggested it. After explaining to them the concerns Dennis and I had about grandfather paradoxes, they suggested I be the one to fix the machine. Only after ensuring all was well would I raise them back from suspended animation. But that doesn't explain how you got back here, Terry said. Well, that's the easy part, said Jason. They set up a suspended animation chamber in a secret place for me too. But there was a time lock on my chamber, which caused me to revive at the very moment I went through that portal. You've been alive this whole time? Asked Mickey, showing a bit of questioning ire. Sweetheart, I had no idea you were told I died. I was hoping you were told I was away for an extended secret mission or something. After I revived and restored the TSM to working order, I saw there was a lot of military presence on the island, so I had to covertly find a way off, which wasn't easy. Something told me I needed to lay low, and that was confirmed one day when I was eavesdropping on a conversation between two soldiers. They were wondering how the Admiral was going to divvy up the duties on the island when he takes it over completely. Then they said there was some secret technology in California the Admiral was going to take over and relocate to the island, and they were hoping to get in on that detail. Looking Mickey straight in the eyes, he said, I had no idea Kenji was so low that he would make you think I had been killed. I'm so sorry. Mickey softened the edges which had formed on her face earlier. I know. You're not the one I should be mad at. She reached up and stroked Jason's cheek, causing him to smile once again. Something doesn't add up here, said Terry. I saw Krelon's bones in his apartment. Jason smiled. You saw fake bones. Fake? Said Terry. Yep. I knew you had seen them just as I had, so I told them we needed to fake the death of all the Galimarians. We came up with a plan where everybody would plant a fake set of bones in each of their homes to make you think they had all died. But why? Why would you create something so awful? Asked Terry. Because if they hadn't, Mickey answered, the course of events leading to Jason going back wouldn't have happened. Knowing his very intelligent wife was really catching on, Jason replied, Exactly. If you hadn't thought they all died, you wouldn't have considered why they died. You wouldn't have been presented with the problem of needing to fix the TSM with Galimarian DNA. You wouldn't have gotten the military involved, and you wouldn't have been introduced to me. It had to happen this way, with no interruptions. There was a general consensus evidenced by the nodding of several heads. Terry then asked, "So, they're all alive? Where?" "They have an ocean floor habitat and are all safely sleeping, waiting for me to wake them up." "What's the plan now?" asked Dennis. "When you came in here, you said you had a plan." "I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. I didn't know why the portal window was gone, but I did know whatever happened probably wasn't something I would like, and it probably had something to do with Kinji. I was thinking we could use the portal to dial up the scene of the portal room at the time I went back, get video evidence of what happened, then send that video to the president." "No can do, amigo," replied Dennis. "Your security key is in the clutches of Admiral Estupido. You and I both know we can't change the security until we are inside the system. Unless we take the dang thing apart, which would take a week, and I don't think he's going to let us dismantle his new toy." Jason smiled. Getting up from his chair, he walked over to his desk and picked up the small statue of Niobe. "Did I ever tell you why this statue was so important to me?" asked Jason, looking at Mickey. "You said it was something having to do with—" Mickey froze, looking at the statue for the first time since she'd put the amulet on in Terry's home. Since she now had knowledge of the Galimarian language, she instantly recognized the writing along the bottom of the statue and what it said. Mickey smiled. "Be careful. Don't drop it." Jason's eyebrows raised in surprise, then he smiled. As the statue slipped from his fingers, he casually said, "Oops." The small plaster statue of the namesake of the primary metal used in the super collider fell to the floor, shattering into several large pieces of mortar. Tumbling out from the middle of the heap was a small plastic container, within which was a second USB key. "Well, I'll be a son of a gun," said Dennis. Hey, fellow Galimarians, this is Dan Adrian, and I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my book. If you can, please click like down below, because it really helps me bring these videos to you and lets me know what you like. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe and click on the bell so that you'll get notified when I release more chapters. If you have any questions about this or any other of my books, or if you want to know more about what it takes to write a novel like this one, please make sure you leave your question in the comments below. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.